Recently, I've been talking about the conditions that promote or hinder freedom. Focusing on abstract ideas is bad for freedom. Aiming for practical solutions for real-world problems is good for freedom. Tribalism is bad for freedom. Commitment to objectivity and rationality is good for freedom, as is commitment to building and maintaining a good order in society. Finally, compassion is also good for freedom, because it helps maintain other pro-freedom conditions, like objectivity, and prevent anti-freedom conditions like tribalism. The goal, of course, is to move society towards the things that are conducive to freedom and away from the things that are harmful for freedom. I think we can tie the aforementioned observations into an overall outlook. I would call this the practical, progressive outlook. It is practical because it is centered on practical problem solving. That is, we'll focus on the practical solutions to resolve problems and improve things in the real world, and avoid being tied down by abstract philosophy and theory. Looking at the bigger picture, we would aim to ensure that the social order actually serves the needs of all, and aim to gradually improve everyone's ability to pursue a good life over time. Overall, I think it is actually very similar to the original aspirations of the classical liberals from the past.
Firstly, practical means not being tied down by ideology. Classical liberals like John Locke, Adam Smith, and John Stuart Mill had a belief in freedom and guiding values and principles stemming from this belief. But going beyond this, they were not overly ideological, because that would hinder freedom itself. Classical liberals also understood that life is not perfect, and they would never let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The institutions built by followers of classical liberal thinking were designed to promote freedom in a practical way, rather than to bring about an imagined utopia. Such institutions were also practically built, with a need for people to compromise in mind. In contrast, some parts of the contemporary Western left, under the influence of postmodern critical theory, believed that seeing everything in oppressor versus oppressed terms, trying to deconstruct every aspect of language and culture, mindlessly challenging traditional norms beyond actually demonstrable need, and refusing to compromise would magically lead to some kind of utopia on earth. This is clearly ideological and not practical. The results also speak for themselves. Confusion over what social justice is, backlash to the concept of social justice itself, and a general rise in reactionary sentiment is what this ideology has brought. A practical progressivism will be able to stop and reverse all this, just by being, well, practical. It is time to throw away all the postmodern theory and look at what could be done to resolve problems and improve things in the real world. We would also need to get over, or at least tame, the tribalist and adversarial nature of Western politics. As I recently demonstrated, left and right are arbitrary linguistic constructs, and treating them as real categories would just lead to more tribalism and irrationality, as well as a focus on the abstract rather than the practical. While progressive and conservative are often thought as opposed to each other, this is actually an illusion caused by tribalism. Conservatism, as properly understood in the Burkean philosophical sense, is not opposed to all change, but only radical change that is rooted in abstract ideas that are alien to a given society's traditions. There is a good reason for this. Change that is rooted in abstract philosophy rather than practical needs, especially if it is alien to the traditions of a given society, is likely to generate chaos followed by a reactionary response. Hence, Burkean conservatism is basically about saving the progressive impulse from its dark and destructive side. We need to reintegrate the Burkean conservative critique into progressive philosophy itself. This will ensure that any change will be born out of actual need and not philosophical theory. It will also ensure that any change will aim to build on our long-standing traditions rather than be part of a misguided attempt to deconstruct everything and rebuild everything from scratch. Indeed, a combination of Burkean conservatism and the compassion-driven desire to improve conditions for everyone would make a very good foundation for a reformist politics. On a related note, I really need to emphasize that to be practical inherently means being constructively reformist and opposing attempts to burn everything to the ground and starting all over again, in the misguided hopes of reaching some kind of magical utopia. The realistic among us would understand that the world is not perfect and can never be. Creating utopia on earth is not possible, and attempting to do so will only lead to unnecessary misery and suffering. If you think about things practically, it is easy to understand that the odds of getting something good out of burning everything to the ground and starting from scratch is pretty low. This alone is more than enough reason to oppose such schemes of revolutionary change. Also, if you don't build on the traditions of a given society, all you are left with is trying to build a society upon abstract ideas, philosophy, and theory, which we know is inevitably going to be inhumane and bad for freedom.